So now on to some music talk. So JJ, it's no question Nashville is like country music's hometown. Like that is like where country music is born and like
Hmm.
you name it. But alternative music, hardcore music, punk music, not so much. So tell us your backstory and how you got into this crazy world that we live in.
Um, Honestly, like we have a venue called Rocketown.
Oh,
And yeah, maybe y'all know Rocketown.
yep.
But that when I was like 11, 12 years old, I started going to shows, and that's really what did it for me. I have an older sister named Victoria who, she was super into like, all that scene music and stuff like that, and she just kind of like dragged me along with her. So we would go to shows. Nashville's local scene was great at the time. It still is, but I'm like a part of it. So like it's different than being like a fan. Um, but Rocketown was like the spot, and bands came through all the time. Um, and I kind of just got sucked into that world. And I started playing drums probably like it was sixth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, something like that. Um, and just wanted to play like, loud, fast music with friends. Never really did that until like high school. And then, my bandmate Zeke and I were like in a Spanish class together and hit it off. And then we started playing, like Fall Out Boy covers and stuff together. So that's how I started playing in the scene. Is like we started Idle Threat and then like move forward. But um, as a listener, it was when I was young, so I was kind of just grandfathered in or whatever you want to say. I kind of just grew up in the scene, and it's changed a lot over the years. But I have to give a shout out to the old Rocket Town for indoctrinating me into punk and hardcore. Um, and then, I guess like Nashville being Music City, like, we do have like the, country and pop and like all that kind of stuff, like hub of America, honestly. But like, I mean, with that existing, we still have a lot of like other acts come through as well.
Hmm.
So like, you know, Bridgestone and its former names or whatever has been great, like to house like shows. And then there's venues on every block. So bands are rolling through all the time. It just depends on like the night, So, but whenever there's one show, there's 50 others, and there's pros and cons to that as well. But, I pretty much got to do and see all the shows that I wanted to. Nobody ever really skips over us. So that's always been nice. But the underground scene's been great here. You just kind of have to look for it sometimes.
Yep.
So
So
uh,
I guess, you mentioned your sister being older, when she was introducing you to this kind of music, was she introducing you to like tooth and nail bands like Under Oath and Amberlin and
As cities
um,
burn.
yeah, like you name them.
I'm gonna give her credit for like the adjacent bands. And I'm sure she'll listen to this eventually, but like, my sister like loved Chiodos.
Hmm.
Um, and like she showed me Chiodos, and I love that band. Did then, did now. But like, I explored a little more than she did, because I was more inclined for like the more metal, like heavy music, and she wanted the more like alternative, like sing-songy stuff. So I remember like one of the first CDs that I ever bought on my own was August Burns Red's Thrill Seeker.
Hmm.
And they're a Tooth and Nail adjacent band. Actually, Solid State band now, so like they're in that world.
Yep.
So and then like my dad, he's a preacher. So we were at like youth events and stuff all the time, and like Christcore, Tooth and Nail and all that like reigns supreme. And during the golden age of like metalcore and all that kind of stuff, like there are a lot of really good Christian bands like out there making a name for themselves, like the ones you just named. So like, Under Oath blew up seemingly like overnight. And like, I don't know, I absolutely adore them. Um, I never super got into As Cities Burn, which is
Mhm.
shocking to a lot of people. They just never really like clicked with me. But we get compared to them all the time. So people are like, "Oh, like, is that one of your influences?" And I'm
Not
like
really.
they have some good songs. I just never did the deep dive, and like I can't say that like they're an influence of mine, but you know, um, Tooth and Nail, like as a whole, though, like they pumped out records that I just absolutely wore out. Like, um, and it's cool because like a lot of my absolute favorite records ever made, like you can flip over the CD or the vinyl or whatever, and that Tooth and Nail stamp is there, and that's incredible to me. Especially since we ended up signing with them, and
Yeah.
I could talk about that later, but um, yeah, I don't know, like it kind of just felt like sometimes like you're just in the right place at the right time and stuff. And for me, like growing up in the Nashville scene, in the Bible Belt, I'm a preacher's kid and like all
Mhm.
that, like Tooth and Nail literally was just perfect for me. And regardless of like your religious beliefs or whatever, like Tooth and Nail was pumping out incredible music that was making waves. So um, yeah, it was just another match made in heaven. So
Now, you did mention that your dad is a preacher, so, like, when you'd be home, middle school, high school, like, blasting this screaming music, and, like, your dad probably thinking, like, that you're listening to, devil worshiping music, but then did you just, like, show him, like, "No, dad, look, there's the Tooth and Nail label, we're good, we're good." Like,
so
was that, like,
so
your way to listen to some of that stuff?
Shout out to Mark because he, incredible man, but he actually was like pretty cool with it. So like he's really the reason that I got into music and then definitely playing drums because he was a drummer too.
Mhm.
And like, straight up like his favorite bands are like, Journey and AC/DC and I could name a million. Like he loves the Eagles and like Yes and you know all those bands, but he loved Rush, so, like, he got me into Rush at, like, a young age, um, which, Neil Peart, probably the greatest drummer that will ever walk the face of the earth,
Yep.
so, like, we, listened to Rush and stuff all the time, so fast forward to when I was into all this, like, obscure metal music and stuff like that, he didn't really mind, and it was funny because like, it'd be like, "Hey, I'm going to this show," or whatever. Even when I was like 13, I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm going to the show," and he'd be like, "Who are you seeing?" And I'd tell him, and he'd be like, "Oh, that's cool." And like my mom was more of the one that was just like, "Well, what do they like sing about and stuff?" And I'm like, "Well, they're actually a Christian band." And after a while, I'm sure like parents, of anybody who said stuff like that, it was just like, "Well, it doesn't sound like it," that kind of thing. And that always cracked me up because like people, just kind of assume like, oh, your dad's a preacher, like he probably hates all that stuff. And surprisingly enough, my dad's always been like really cool about it. And like with our band and stuff like that, he's been very supportive. And yeah, like there's been a couple times I've bought like CDs and like I would come home from school or something and like he would be, listening to The Devil's Prada or something. I'm like, what are you doing with my CD? And he's like, oh, I'm just checking it out. I'm like, that's cool. Like I love that. That's awesome.
So like
So
I'll pull a Tom really quick and just kind of like dive into my background of metalcore and hardcore because that was the typical pop punk life is it's this music for hardcore musicians that couldn't make it in hardcore. But one of so back when we used to play church shows and we had a Rocket Town down in South Florida too.
yeah.
Uh, Back when we used to play all those shows, one of my favorite bands to play with was a Nashville metalcore band called A Plea for Purging.
Yep, one of my favorite bands that ever existed.
Literally, like, and like, I still follow Dozer on Instagram. I want to try his hamburgers. Like, A Plea for Purging was like one of the greatest bands to like come through, like in South Florida, and like knowing that they were from Nashville, it was always really fun to kind of like take the stage with them. meet them. Like, I remember this girl got like a Dozer tattoo on her foot, and I was like, that's crazy. But Mikey, so basically, A Plea for Purging was this metalcore band, and Dozer was their singer. He was this big bearded dude, and they'd always make these like outrageous music videos because they were just hilarious individuals. But they were like straight up, like, just like August Burns Red style metalcore, but they were Christian metalcore, and they would come through all the time with like My Children, My Bride. Once Nothing was another big like Southern metal band that I really got into. And I'm trying to remember like a few others too. I just, they're like off the tip of my tongue. I can't think about them. But I remember when I was listening to you guys, and I'm a really big fan of Furnace Fest and every band that has played Furnace Fest. And yeah, I got a really big influence of As Cities Burns from you guys. But I think when I first listened to, the new album that you guys put out, I got like my heartstrings tugged because you guys sound like Beloved.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite bands, hands down.
Yeah.
And that was like that feeling I got.
Yeah, which I love hearing that. So it's so funny because like over the years, people have, being in a band, you get comparisons and stuff all the time. But there's been a couple people that have compared us to Beloved, and that always just like hits for me because like anytime I hear As Cities Burn, I'm like, okay, cool, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but like for me, it doesn't do anything. And like neither of my other bandmates really listen to them either, surprisingly enough.
Yeah.
But we get like, it's weird. We get like Title Fight a lot, which like that's one of Zeke's favorite bands. So like he loves that. And then we get Counterparts for some reason, which like all three of us, the main three of us, love Counterparts. But like the one that I've always loved is like, it's very rare, but when they bring up Beloved, I'm like, thank you, because
it's the old guard.
Yeah, I love it. And like, I want to play like one show with that band, but they're not like super active. But I'm hoping maybe within the next like year or so that like our paths cross and we get to do something together, because it would mean a lot to me.
So your paths just crossed. I'm gonna text Dusty right now and be like, "Yo, Dusty, you
gotta go." They were a former guest on the show.
They were, yeah. Oh yeah, and he's a big hockey fan.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah, because even what was the band they had after Advent, or was Advent before Beloved?
So I think they were.
He went into like Dead Poetic, and then he joined. Right? So Beloved, Dusty then went to play with Dead Poetic, and then the Almost. He played with the Almost for a while.
But did and I could be completely wrong. Didn't Advent and Beloved kind of have like an overlapping?
I think
like somewhere.
So. I'm trying to remember.
But and anything Beloved did and anything Advent did, like I just instantly was in love with. And I will die on this hill that Advent is the best hardcore band that has ever existed, which I know is a very bold statement.
That's a very bold statement. So
I love that band.
Advent came across after Beloved had kind of disbanded, for lack of a better term, because I don't think Beloved ever really disbanded. But I grew up in the Eulogy Records scene. Like that was my whole life was Eulogy Records. I went to Eulogy Fest every year, and I'm gonna have to like counter the best hardcore band ever, because Advent's up there. They're top 5 for me, but I'm gonna have to go with one of the best hardcore bands that I've seen live. I'll go with like top 3 or top 2. It would definitely be Bane for me.
Okay.
And Casey Jones, and I'm not straight edge, but Casey Jones.
I saw them at
the Polish American. And they were one of the best hardcore bands I've ever seen live. Next to like Shere Khan too, but
I guess if we're like ranking, like, and it's really just because I was a tooth and nail kid, like Christcore guy, but like Advent for me is number 1, and then I love Rotting Out. Yeah, I'm a big Rotting Out fan. I would say that they're a close second. I guess if you're really getting into like, the traditional sound
Hmm.
hardcore and all that, like they are the best hardcore band in my opinion. But like, um, I just love Advent. And I don't know who third would be. Probably Trapped Under Ice. I don't know. That's something I'll have to think about. I'll have to get back to y'all like in some DMs later. But
I don't even want
Yeah.
to say
Look,
mine because I'll just like lose all credit, and they're like, "All right, bar down, breakdown. You're not making it to episode 150. You're done."
look, I love Trapped Under Ice, but the best thing to come out of Trapped Under Ice is Turnstile.
I knew that was gonna come up somehow, and I mean ah, you're probably right. I mean they're doing big things,
Yep.
especially for like the entire genre. Like they're bringing a whole new wave of like people into hardcore. So like you
Hmm.
can't do anything but respect that. So that and their music's just fun. Like some of the best shows I've ever been to, Turnstile was playing. So like I yeah, that band is doing some really amazing things. I'm got nothing but love for them. Definitely rooting for them. So
They've done more for the city of Baltimore, than the city of Baltimore has.
So, JJ, you mentioned how important Tooth and Nail was. Like, what was it like when, like, they came knocking, or even if you guys came knocking
oh
first
man.
and then they listened? Like, tell me how that whole process went down, and like, how were you not just like fanboying the whole time,
So it's
or
funny.
were you fanboying the whole
Oh,
time?
Yeah.
I absolutely was and still am sometimes about just the most random things. But like, I remember we had kind of gone through like some rough spots with like just being in a band and like, it. There was some stuff that happened that it was just like, we're all growing up and like, we had been touring like I don't want to say nonstop, but we toured quite a bit in
Hmm.
the 2017 through like 2019 like time. So like it got to the point where it was just like, okay, like I was like, I want this to grow. Like I want to, see the fruit of my labor. I want to like do this, that, and the other. And like, we're only getting older. And like, I'm only 26 now, almost 27. So like I'm not old, but like it just like felt like that because like, touring 100 days out of the year or whatever. It was just kind of like all right, like I have to be an adult and I also still want to do this whole like band thing. So like anyway, it got to a point where there was some fighting and like arguments and like some stuff that happened like within our band and like I think now it's only brought us like closer as like
Hmm.
bandmates. But like I was at the point where I was like, guys, like if we don't get my dog just shut the lights off. Uh,
So it was like the clapper.
yeah, yeah, she like I'm actually gonna like let her outside. That's what she wants. I should have realized that earlier. Um,
That is
so
one smart dog.
Yeah.
yeah, she's a big, beautiful idiot, is what I call her. This is actually my sister's dog. I'm house sitting for them right now.
Oh.
So yeah, well, she has two dogs, but anyway, so um, I remember basically just telling my bandmates like, "Hey, if we don't get signed, like I want to plan for like the end." So we do like a fest every year and like all this stuff. And I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna like book the fest, and this will be my last show. Like, if we're not gonna kind of make a little bit more of a future out of it, like I just want to end like on a good note."
Hmm.
Um, and that turned into um, like we're going to send out X amounts of emails in order to like maybe hear from a label or something. Um, and we chose our top. We were at a practice one time, like talking about all this, and I was like, "All right, let's sit down and make a list of like the labels that we would want to be on." And when we had started the bands, like back in 2014, the three labels that I joked about all the time, but very serious. I was like, if we're ever on Blood and Ink Records, Face Down Records, or Tooth and Nail, I'll be stoked. And we flirted with Blood and Ink for a while, and that didn't work out, which I'm very glad it didn't. And rip. But then we talked to Face Down for a little bit, and it was nice, but it wasn't a fit, so we moved on. And then we fast forward to that practice. We chose 10 labels, and we sent out some emails, and Tooth and Nail was the only label that got back to us. So we started our contract negotiations, and we were lucky enough to, during that time, like November of 2019, we got offered to play a sold out show at Exit Inn in Nashville, which is probably my favorite venue there, just historically, other than maybe the Ryman. But we got to open for Norma Jean and Gideon and the Devil Wears Prada, which three of my very favorite bands. And we killed it. The crowd liked it. We had a lot of fun. I still think it was the best night of my life. It was just a blast. But I crossed paths with Corey Brandon at that show, and he and I hit it off, just like joking around and stuff. But he has become one of my, like, I don't want to speak too high, but like we're like really good friends now. So like we text and stuff all the time. But like we literally, like this past weekend, we just played a show with Norma Jean in Atlanta, and was an absolute blast. And like Corey's been a really, really good friend to us. So very encouraging. And he sang on one of the songs on our new record. And I've been listening to Norma Jean since I was in like 5th grade. So like the fact that like I even have like Corey's number, like, is crazy to me. But that was the first time at that Prada show that we played with them, when I was talking to Corey about all this stuff, that it hit me like, oh man, like we're signing to Tooth and Nail. Like we're, gonna be in the same, like, when people talk about us, probably going to be in the same breath as like the Norma Jeans and like the, Under Oaths and all that stuff. So it really became real for me that night. And then fast forward to like, February, March, when COVID is coming around, it was just kind of like, oh shit, like, what are we going to do? And we were still in contract negotiation at that point. We ended up signing shortly after, like, everybody was shut down. I remember like my bandmates and I like met up to sign the contracts, and then we like ate at like an Outback Steakhouse or something like that, like because it was open, and like we were joking about like balling out and stuff. So we were like the only people in the restaurant because everybody was like scared of like COVID, which like rightfully so. But like I remember just feeling how weird it was to be like, oh my gosh, we're signing this contract, and then like the world's still like on hold. But I remember getting in my car that night, and I was just like, oh my God, we signed a record deal. Like, and it's to Tooth and Nail, which is like a label that undoubtedly changed my life, and path as a person, let alone as a musician. So, yeah, that was incredible. And then there's been all sorts of stuff, like putting out our first record, putting out our first music video, like even, making the music video was incredible to me. And like, it's the only time I think I've ever been nervous, like playing drums or anything. Like it was so nerve wracking, but like, all those little moments aren't really so little. So they definitely strike a chord with me. So every time we do something even remotely cool, I'm like, oh my God, like we signed to Tooth and Nail. Like this is everything that I've ever wanted, and like we're not a big deal like at all, but it's just really cool to kind of like have your dreams come true. I don't know a way of phrasing that without it being cheesy, but like, I was a Tooth and Nail kid, and now my band is a Tooth and Nail band. So like, it's incredible. And nobody can really take that from me. So yeah,